that was a nice little track. It's hopefully still going behind my voice. I wanted to play out fully, and we'll just fade it out a little bit if it's too loud. But
Loved it.
love that track. Thanks, Brad, for that. We'll make sure to put his information, because honestly, one of the best sound guys. Legit.
That I know.
love Brad. But anyways, today just want to get back into the studio and record this podcast. And obviously we're trying to keep it slightly longer format to be able to give time to these topics. Again, keeping it lighthearted, but also want to be serious and offer some good tips. So today we're going to cover two things. One of them being raising children and seeking to raise them in a way that's godly, in a way that's God honoring. And then the second topic is going to be dating and what is Christian dating and things of that nature. So I'll go ahead and let you take over from here.
So quick tips. So we're gonna start on this one's for you, and I'm pretty sure all the married couples with kids will appreciate this one. And disciplining children. So just like some formative tips, I guess we can start there.
Right. So when people think of disciplining children, they mostly always think of corrective discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously corrective discipline would just be something as simple as, spanking, or if people don't employ the spanking method, they'll do something that's called like the non-aggression principle. Well, they'll take away things, they'll punish via, timeout and things of that nature. And that's commonly what's called corrective discipline, which I'll spend some time addressing, but I kind of want to get into something that's often overlooked in Christian circles, which is called formative discipline.
Okay.
And, I was talking to someone recently, and it's kind of so simple yet so profound, where disciplining is discipling.
Mm-hmm.
That's why those words have such a strong root meaning together.
Right.
Because there's a strong connection between disciplines and discipling. You're literally teaching your children how to live life,
Yeah.
So what I want to start off by saying regarding formative discipline is, so many times Christian parents, they just depend on corrective discipline, right? And many times the child might not even be fully aware on why they're being punished. Sure, they know why they're being punished in the immediate sense. For instance, you did this and you shouldn't have done this, therefore I'm going to discipline you.
Right.
But what needs to happen beforehand with Christian parenting is formative disciplines. Children need to know why they can't or can do something before they're disciplined correctively for that thing.
Right.
For instance, it would be unfair for a law to be passed overnight, and then let's just say the law was that we can no longer make left turns on this random street. There's no signage that says we can't do that. There's no information that says that we can't do that. There's no update saying we can't do that. And if we make left turns on that street and we get pulled over, we would think, well, we had no idea. Like, when did this get passed, or who? And so many times, in that situation, a driver would get punished because they made a left turn when they shouldn't have. And they'll think, well, I get why I got punished, but I don't get the why behind the why. So with Christian parenting, we have to go above and beyond to first form disciplines and expectations in our children before we turn simply and merely to corrective disciplines. And sadly, I think a lot of Christians have taken a lazy approach to disciplining children by only doing the corrective. The corrective is the easier. It is still hard,
right,
to take the time. And there's even a way to do improper corrective discipline.
Right.
So I want to make sure I address that. But the much more beneficial, godly, less emotionally worked up approach to disciplining children is formative.
Right.
So formative discipline is basically this. Here's what I expect. Here's what the Lord is calling you to do. Here's how you do those things. And you don't want to give your children a ton of laws or a ton of things. It's keep it simple, Today, our goal is to honor Christ.
Right.
To honor your mother and father, and to be obedient to the things that we ask of you. That's it. We don't have to have a little rule everywhere they go in the house. As long as they have these simple formative disciplines instilled in them, they'll think, is what I'm doing honoring Christ? Am I honoring my father and my mother by doing this? Am I being obedient to them in their request? So it kind of just is an all-encompassing thing. And then that's like the simple, explanation of it. But throughout the day, you could be doing formative discipline,
Right.
So an example of that would just be like, if I see my son mistreating my daughter, he might not understand boys shouldn't treat girls a certain way.
Right.
So before I just immediately go to corrective discipline, I should seek to form godly principles in my son and say, hey, Christian men take care of women.
Right.
Christian men are protectors. Christian men protect against agitators and unjust oppressors, which you are turning into one.
Right.
So now me as a Christian man, I need to defend my daughter from you, son. And you explain to them the why behind the correction before you immediately just say, hey, don't do that, spank, or hey, don't do that. And then I'm putting you in timeout.
Right.
So formative discipline, I don't want to go into every example I could give up, but it basically is holding every thought captive to Christ in your children and seeking to, throughout the day, form godly principles in your children.
Right.
In such a way that they know what's expected of them. They know how to honor Christ so that when situations do arise, they're not caught by surprise, know? And I'll just give one last example, with YouTube, and all the mishaps that happen on YouTube with young children and young boys seeing things that they shouldn't be seeing, right? If I'm taking the time in the developmental years of my child, explaining to them, hey, God created you special, and God created you with private parts that other people shouldn't see, and nor should you see other people's private parts, So if I'm doing that and I'm explaining to them, some people misuse their private parts. And again, as they are developing, you're seeking to instill in them these thoughts and these formative understandings of what is godly and what isn't. So by the time that my son, God forbid, comes across, a billboard or a magazine at a gas station or something on YouTube, I don't need to wait until that happens to address it.
Right.
Because for his whole life, I've been seeking to age appropriately get his mind to understand that's not right, because that woman or that man is showing parts of their body that are private.
Right.
Therefore, they're already alerted that's wrong. Now, that doesn't say that their heart won't be tempted.
Right.
Or their little flesh won't be, in a sense, beginning to ask questions. But at minimum, they'll know that's off. That's not godly. That's not honoring Christ, So that's just, again, small aspects of forming discipline in our children. This extends to everything. If I see my son being lazy, I can't spank my son for being lazy.
Right.
If I tell my son, hey, you need to do this and I need to do it quickly, then at that point, I can kind of talk to him and correctively discipline him for not doing things as fast as I was like. But the better approach would be to expose why laziness and slothfulness is a sin and explain to him how we honor Christ by the way we do anything and the way we work.
Right.
So again, this is how we build men and women, is by in their little hearts beginning to form godly principles, form a godly worldview, form a godly understanding of life in the home, life in the workforce, life in the church, etc. So that's formative discipline. I think that there would be much less corrective discipline if more Christian parents were doing formative discipline.
Right.
And what we see, I know I'm hogging the mic, but it's just because, I have children and
I'm taking notes.
Yeah. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm just taking the mic from Rob. But anyways, so I definitely think we would minimize corrective discipline if we worked harder at forming godly disciplines in our children. And ultimately, forming the gospel and teaching them the gospel and teaching them to view all things through the gospel.
Right.
And that their little hearts would grasp the gospel,
Amen.
So then moving on to corrective discipline, this is obviously needed from time to time. But even this could be done half-heartedly.
Right.
If I just yell across the room to correct my son, that's lazy.
Yeah.
If I just raise my voice and say, hey, stop doing that.
Right.
And never address anything further than that, I'm lazy. That's a lazy parent.
Yeah.
A God honoring parent will discipline in a corrective fashion by going to their child, pulling them aside, explaining to them what they did wrong or what they did incorrectly or how they dishonored Christ or whatever the situation is, and seek to turn that situation. Yes, it will have some corrective aspects to it. And then at the same time, you're also forming the discipline in the correction. But so oftentimes it's just, we see just parents just yelling from afar.
Right.
Or parents not going in there and doing the heart work that needs to be done along with the corrective work that needs to be done. So we kind of turn our kids into little moralists, who just think, okay, if I just keep a good outward posture and if I just do all the right things, then dad and mom will be happy.
Right.
Where it's like, no, even if you do those things and your heart is far from those things, from the Lord, you're still just as guilty as if you wouldn't have done them. Of course, we expect outward obedience from our children,
right?
But you, as Christian parents, we have to go in there and do the more difficult work, which is gospel work in our children's lives. And then obviously raising up children, I think, goes hand in hand with family worship. So I'll turn it over to you. I know you've never done family worship yourself, but I mean, you've been part of our family worship, so why don't you go ahead and...
Yeah, I think they've been like very helpful in the sense that it will give me an expectation of something, like a visual, and not only a visual but a practical something to go about in that way. And it's just been very helpful to be able to witness it, I mean, countless times. And I think the best part of it is just how simple it is, especially with being that you've done it with your oldest son, and he understands a little bit more, so like it goes a little bit, the questions are different for him, and the Bible reading is a little different, and depending on what you guys are doing. But yeah, overall the form of it and just the way it flows with the singing and then with the Bible reading and then the prayer, like it's something that is very encouraging. Yeah. And something that I think I'm looking forward to be able to do, hopefully soon one day. But yeah, so I think that's been the most helpful for me.
Yeah, the Puritans would literally, if a man was not doing family worship with their family, they would call men over and be like, hey, come over to the house,
Right.
And they would just, I want you to be part of our family worship.
Right. That was Spurgeon's biggest compliment from just outsiders that were coming to visit him, was that he would let people in on his family worship time, and people would walk away from that the most encouraged, and the stories they had to say about that were, they said, some say it was like life-changing in that way, coming from him. But so hearing it, and just experiencing it and just doing it, I think we're around a lot of guys now in our church that are taking part in that, with their families, so that's encouraging also. Yeah,
in fact, the way I really got more discipline in this area was by seeing a brother invite me in to his home, and he did family worship with his children, and from the oldest to the youngest, all were answering questions, catechism questions, age appropriate for their age,
right.
When my daughter was not even a year old, I could say, who made you? And she would point up,
right.
And I could say, what else did God make? And she just would move her hands saying everything. And yeah, she might not grasp that mentally, like God really created her, but
right.
You're just instilling in them timeless truths, for their little hearts. And so, yeah, like it's a testament to the whole thing with Spurgeon, that literally happened in my life with a dear brother. And, we came home, and the next day just got after it. And I just was amazed by what my, 1.5-year-old son at that time could comprehend. And, by God's grace, he's able to answer questions that are just rock solid, like even now at 4 years old. And my daughter can tell you, what is the law of God? And she can tell you, I just turned 2. She could tell you literally, what are the 2 ordinances that the Lord left for us, and what did Christ's death redeem, and right. Every part of fallen creation. So family worship is a time to really spend learning about Christ, learning about the Word, learning about the gospel, and just learning that, hey, in this house we worship Christ.
Right.
We worship Christ on the living room floor. We sing together. We pray together. And, we enjoy the word together. And I think that if Christian parents took what we've been talking about, discipline, formative and corrective, family worship, and sought to imply this to everyday life, we would really see a culture change in the next generations,
Right.
Like Christians having 3-4 children, over the course of 100 years, that's multiplication. And Christians taking those children and training them up like an arrow in the hands of a warrior, to be sent out and to really engage the world. I think we would see so much fruit from these endeavors, So I really want to stress the importance of these things, because our children will be the next generation to, Lord willing, rise up, and the Lord will use them to be movers and shakers in this world. And then obviously, we read Chronicles of Narnia before bed with our children to get their little minds excited. My one plea would be that we would not throw away our children's time and our children's hearts by just entertaining them to death with iPads or with video games or even just endless amount of playtime. Now that we would be balanced parents who understand living all of life to the glory of God, from playing to school, from reading to drawing, every area is the Lord's, but that we would truly not waste our children's life in the short time that we have them.
Right.
So I think that'll be a good place to stop for the children aspect. So let's go into Christian dating. So
Christian dating.
You as a single man, what is the goal of Christian dating?
Christian dating. Marriage.
Yep.
Yes, that's always that's the aim. That's the goal, and I think just being clear and upfront about it from the very beginning is always the best.
So making your intentions known.
Of course, yeah. Just making intentions known and making everything as clear and upfront as possible, and just, if you can, just have accountability.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough to have my pastor, and of course other brothers that are close to me, and I'm just allowing myself to open up in that sense. And
wait, are you breaking every girl's heart that listens to this podcast and saying I won't make you answer that question? But no, let me ask you this: how do you show your intention without looking like a creep? Like, what do you do? Like, obviously, like, I'm asking these questions not because I don't know or because I'm interested, just for clarity of the listener. Do you just go up to a girl and be like, "Hey, what's up? I'm Rob, and I want to marry you," or how can you go about showing your intentions while still seeming normal?
I think it's just going off like a pretty much a friendship,
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously these are sisters in the Lord, and we have to treat them as such.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you get a no,
Mm-hmm.
or a so-called rejected,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't change the fact of who they are, and it doesn't take away any of their value,
Mm-hmm.
or their outlook or your outlook to them.
Right.
But
and there really is no rejections in the Lord,
right? So it's just really just
His will just comes to pass.
Yeah, and I mean, from the guys I've talked to, and the advice I've gotten is just, you go, you show your intention, if it's not there, it's not there, and there's nothing wrong in that. And but yeah, hold on, ask me the question again, because I got sidetracked.
So how do you make your intentions known without seeming like, oh man, this guy, like, I just met him and he's interested in me, but he's talking about marriage on like our first 5 minutes together?
Well, I wouldn't bust it out after 5 minutes, but but definitely just something to build on, just a friendship, and let it go from there. And obviously, I mean, depending if they go to your church, or you know them through mutual friends, or however you guys hang out or communicate, just let it flow. And I would say just be in prayer and let other guys know that, hey, pray for me on this, like, I'm really interested in so and so, and just go about it in that way.
Right. Yeah. And I think, again, if going back to the raising children, if men were taught by their fathers how to approach women, how to talk to women, how to make intentions known, they'd be forming those disciplines.
Right.
And if women were taught by their fathers what it looks like to meet a man who's intentional, a man who's thoughtful, a man who has a plan,
Right.
then they wouldn't automatically think creep, you know, and men wouldn't be so, you know, apprehensive to go up to a girl and be intentional, and then being in fear of her thinking she's gonna think I'm a creep. She's gonna think I'm a creep. You know? So to me, you know, when I met my wife, I wanted to make my intentions known, and you know, when we were hanging out and talking, and I just wanted to be straightforward and direct with her because I didn't really know her upbringing that well.
Right.
I just said on our first hangout, you know, when you know clearly, you know, there was some interaction going on and we seemed to be connecting well. I just said, hey, just so you know, like, you know, when I think of Christian dating, I think of marriage. So I would never even pursue anything unless I was willing to marry that person.
Right.
And I said, I don't want you to think I'm saying I want to marry you.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm willing to marry the girl I'm going to date.
Right.
So therefore, if I'm going to date her, that necessitates me being willing to marry her.
Right.
So that kind of just let, you know, her know, like, if we do go beyond friendship, it's because there's an intention of marriage there, you know? And, you know, like, there's winsome ways to approach this. There's godly ways to approach this without looking like, you know, some creep or whatever. But, you know, what would be, like, here's a funny question. And I think it's useful, and it's going to sound funny, but I do think a lot of men will be helped by it.
Okay.
And maybe you're maybe not the best answer. Maybe you are. I don't know. We'll find out. But you know, back in the worldly days, there was something called game. You know, like, dang, like, you got game, or dang, did they game you up or whatever, right?
Right. You need some.
So, what would you say is, like, how can Christians, not to say game because you're not playing a game with the girl, right?
Right.
But how can Christians be winsome and like, what would you give advice to? What advice would you give to a young guy who wants to approach a girl and is just scared?
Just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Okay, how does he go? Like put some meat on those bones.
All right, put some meat. So depending where you are, you're at a Bible study or something, you know, just go and casually start a conversation. You know, you're not gonna look like a creep because you're around people.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard. You know, if she was isolated somewhere, you probably look like a creep.
Yeah.
But being that you're in a group setting around friends, around close people,
which is how it happens in Christian circles
most of the time.
Yeah.
And then so just, you know, just going and starting a conversation. Obviously, if she's somewhat interested in any kind of way, you know, it's gonna flow back. You know, and sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But my best advice would be, don't take it personal. You know, there's nothing personal if the girl doesn't like you, or, you know, she's not obligated to like you because you're a Christian, you know, in that sense. So, it's just, you know, just going about it and just be yourself, you know, like, as corny as that sounds, it's really like, you don't have to change who you are. You don't have to, like, come out super theological or, you know, super spiritual. Like, everything isn't like a spiritual question. Like, you're going to do life with this person. And I would say about maybe 90% of the time, you're not going to be talking about theology. Like, you know, it's more than that, you know? So as much as it is that, it's still like more than that.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's the basis for everything, but it isn't just like every day you're talking about like the ontological trinity and its implications, you know?
Right.
No. And I think that's wise, you know, to just be yourself. And again, as you know, as cliche as that sounds, but what happens is a lot of Christian guys try to be someone they're not. And then 6 months later, you're like, hold up, you're not that person that I thought you were, you know? For instance, you know, like a Christian guy will try to, you know, act more serious or more pious when he's around, you know, the girl he wants to be around. And I mean, we all fall into that trap, you know?
Right. Or he just goes mute.
Yeah, and just mute and doesn't talk, or worries like, oh, she might think this, or she might, you know, think that I'm being too this, or, well, if I say, you know, a quote from The Office, maybe she'll think I'm worldly. It's like, no, like you be yourself and you trust the Lord's providence and you honor the Lord. You know, obviously if you're doing something sinful, that's different.
Right.
But if you're just being yourself and enjoying, you know, the time together with your friends, and, you know, that's what really reveals people's personality, to see if you click without having to go, like, you know, on these quests for love. You know, it's like, man, you know, you're just sitting in a room, everyone's hanging out, everyone's talking. It's like, dang, I think I could vibe with that person, you know?
Right.
And then whatever, you know, like things naturally happen. So I definitely think that's wise, you know, and I think I just would encourage, you know, single guys to find a single woman who is godly and loves the Lord and marry her.
Exactly.
You know? And there's obviously the physicality game of it and all of that, but at the end of the day, you know, you're marrying someone who's going to help you become closer to Christ, who's going to help you, Lord willing, raise a godly seed for Christ. And, you know, when you're 5 years in, a couple of kids, you know, as busy as can be, you know, physicality will never sustain a marriage. Physicality will never be, you know, the bonds that hold a marriage together. And if they are, you got some bigger problems anyways, you know?
Right.
So I'd much rather, you know, a man look at the I say spiritual, but you know what I mean? Like the spirituality of a woman more than the physicality of a woman, because that's what is lasting,
right?
You know? And I think that's what, you know, will be more of benefit than mere physicality, you know? So I just would encourage single men to find someone who they find attractive, because of their, you know, semblance of Christ and the way that they live their life, and just go after it, you know?
Right.
You don't need some corny pickup lines, you know, you don't got to try to be the funny guy in the room. You just be yourself, be direct, be intentional.
And I think that's different than when you say, like, in, I guess, in the worldly way, you were to say like the word like game.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, winsome's a perfect word for that. But in that sense, you don't really have to try to really outdo anybody or even yourself in that sense. Or pretty much game is another way of putting it, is like you're putting up a front.
Yep.
You know, it's not really you, it's a game.
Yeah. And it's, you're convincing someone, you have to convince someone to be with you.
Right. So it's like, and you know, I'll probably saying too much here, but even dating back before I was a Christian, it was like talking to someone and getting to know someone. But even then, I knew that the person they were getting to know was fabricated.
Right.
I was like switching things up. I was saying things that weren't really, that wasn't me.
Hey, I'm Portuguese, baby. Yeah, to Amea. He goes, yeah. That's how like make up words.
It was, so it wasn't really, the last thing I was being myself.
Yeah.
And in that sense, but so yeah. And then if the girl that you do meet that's a Christian and you're a Christian, she's gonna respond well to your honesty, to how straight up you are, and even to your intentions.
Exactly. And if she doesn't, then you don't want homegirl anyway.
Right. Exactly.
If a girl is not trying to get married and that's too much for her, then that's God's providence saying that's not the girl for you.
Right.
Or if your manner of being is not her liking, then big deal. You move on, she moves on. You don't even move on. Nothing even happened. You just keep going, living life.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of trusting Christ in all this, is the Lord, you know, in his wisdom, is having things by his providence come about that let me know his will.
Right.
You know? And of course there's times where, like, you know, a girl might say no, that's fine. She might say no twice, that's fine. By the third time she's like, you know what? I'm being dumb, you know?
Right.
That can happen. I'm not saying if she says no once, just give up. I'm just saying
just give up.
I'm just saying that they're, you know, we become like these like psychic readers and thinking that we know, you know, she did this, so then that means this, and I'm gonna do this, and it's like, just live life, you know?
Right.
And I would encourage guys who are like, you know, trying to be friends and they're scared to what we would call shoot your shot, you know? Like, bro, you're not helping anyone out by becoming the best friend that a girl can have.
Right.
You're walking into the friend zone. No such thing as a friend zone for Christians anyways, but you know what I mean? You're walking to the friend zone, and then by the time you shoot your shot, you're going to be 6-7 months in, and you're going to be developing all types of feelings, and now you're going to be heartbroken.
Right.
So you're not helping her. You're not helping yourself. You're just, for lack of a better word, scared of what might happen if you show vulnerability. So you definitely don't want to play, you know, the long game in any of this. You know, you don't want to be creep and rush it on the first day either. It's just about balance. It's about enjoying life, showing your intentions, and making it clear that, hey, we don't got to wait until the stars align, you know? And we also don't need to rush this as if, you know, like we're going to die tomorrow, you know? But at the same time, it's like, just show your intentions, you know, and be content in Christ, number one, because she's not going to fulfill any contentment. Neither is marriage. So, you know, get right with the Lord primarily. You know, but it's just some practical advice that I like to give would be, you know, if you're going to date a girl at church, you know, once you guys start talking, you don't got to sit together at church. You know, you don't have to like walk in with her and like that. Just, you know, and until things are more serious, just keep things, you know, at a safe distance, because if it doesn't work out, then there's nothing awkward, you know? But once you guys are official, obviously that changes everything. So that's just a little, you know, practical advice. What else would I give as practical advice? I definitely think that men should start preparing for marriage, even if there's no one in sight, you know? That means taking care of your money. That means getting a good job, a good career. That means this isn't the time to become, you know, the Call of Duty champion because you don't have a marriage, because you don't have a family to take care of, you know? Like, live your life as if you have a family. That way when you have to transition into that, you know, saying I do changes nothing. You know, like it changes everything, if you know what I mean, but it changes nothing about you. You know, so prepare and live your life as if you already are a family man. So that's some more practical advice. And honestly, I feel for all my single friends out there, because we're living in a time where someone could have been legit, reformed, evangelical, you know, all intents and purposes godly, and then they embrace the woke movement, you know, or they embrace, you know, godless ideologies, or
they have BLM on their page,
or a sinful worldview, you know, or like, and that to me has been the biggest, like, you know, just thinking about my children, especially my daughters, and thinking like, oh man, like, not my daughters, my daughter, and just saying like, dang, she can be like a guy that, you know, seems solid, and then the, you know, a little bit of persecution or tension comes, and it's like, dang, they aren't that solid, you know? So be praying for your future spouse. Be praying that you would find someone that truly loves the Lord and doesn't cave to culture, but instead seeks to influence culture and influence, you know, society by raising a godly family. So I'm not trying to say this to make people panic and say like, you know, you could end up with someone bad. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying be on your knees praying for your future spouse, you know, that the Lord would shape them into be someone who loves the Bible, who loves Christ, who has a biblical worldview, because we're living in a time where it's like a biblical worldview is hard to find, you know? So when you find her, seal the deal.
Don't sleep on it.
Don't sleep on it. And ladies, if he's standing in front of you and he's not 6'5", you know, he's not driving this Bentley or whatever, you know, forget all that. Find a man who loves the Lord and has a biblical worldview.
I'm 6'5",
is gospel centered, Christ centered, and marry that guy. You know, if he's legit checking off all the most important boxes. And the same thing for you fellas, you know, like, we're just living in such a superficial age, and Instagram models and Photoshop. It's like our minds are being warped to have a misconception of reality.
And I think for a lot of like single brothers and just anybody like out there, if you think you could be on Instagram and, you know, look at and certain images pop up and you think you could just brush them off, we deceive ourselves in that. And if you think those images and those pictures are not going to affect the way you little by little won't affect your reality or your view towards a Christian sister, you're wrong in that sense, because it's gonna make you say, well, that's not really what I'm looking for, but it is what you're looking for. So even in that sense, I think like a lot of that stuff you just have to be very careful with, and just how you go about it, and you know what's on your social media and stuff like that. But
for sure, that's the lust of the eyes,
right.
And that's what makes how do you say pornography? I don't know. Pornography. I'm like, how do you say this word? Pornography is so dangerous is because you're literally like, imprinting onto your mind images that are hard to erase.
Right.
And then when you look at, those things, and then, for married men, you look at your spouse and you think like, okay, why does that look drastically different than that?
Right. Right.
And then you begin to compare wickedness with righteousness.
Right.
And your heart starts to lust after the wickedness because you've bought into a fantasy and a lie. And the same thing happens, not on such a, level like that, but even like you said, like, Instagram models or whatever that, just do their makeup and, are like crazy out there with their eyebrows and like lip injections and all that. It's like, you compare that and you look at, not to be rude in any way, but plain Jane, so to speak, who's godly, who's, beautiful in her own way.
Right.
Who has like what Peter talks about, like that inner beauty.
Right.
Not with braided hair and all of that, modest and beautiful. It's like, well, no wonder you can't find, quote unquote, again, for lack of a better word, plain Jane attractive. Is because you're comparing her to someone who doesn't even really possess all those qualities. It's completely a farce. And yet you're like, man, why can't I find a honey like that that's just Christian? It's like, well, honey like that's just Christian. Like, yeah, she may exist, but that's not what you're called to look after. You're called to look after a Christian girl who loves the Lord. Right. And obviously attraction is important, but it's not nearly as important as people make it out to be. Right. But man, yeah, I think I could talk about this all day. And I think this is one of the areas where, the average age of marriage 50, 60 years ago was early 20s. Right. And now the average age and the percentage of age of marriage is, upwards of high 20s, low 30s. And on top of that, it was like 90% would get married. Right. And now it's like 20% are getting married. And the church kind of reflects those numbers as well. It's not like the church is immune to those things. Right. And on top of that, marriage, as opposed to being a building block of society, is now considered a lifestyle choice, like veganism or something, So just Satan's attack on marriage and our worldview of marriage have really made an impact on the church. And this isn't to knock anyone, you're in your early 30s. That's not to knock you in any way, but it is to say that Christianity needs to do a better job of forming disciplines in their children so that when they become of age, they don't mess around, I think that's good. And go ahead and bring any questions or comments and we'll be happy to address them.
Sounds good.
Peace.